Welcome to Candlewick Library. I'm Cheryl. Today is part 2 of what I read in March. Last time I covered the first half of the books I read in March. Today I'm going to get to the rest of them. But first, I'm going to share a book that Doug read. In March, he finished The Little Broomstick by Mary Stewart. This is one that he got, I believe we gave it to him for Christmas. And the reason being that he loves the movie Mary and the Witch's Flower, and I found out that this was the book that movie was based on. It's tied to a tradition that he brought into the family of watching it every year on a certain day. So I thought that would be really fun to give him the book that movie was based on. He did like it, but he did talk about a lot of the changes that were made in the movie, and I think because he saw the movie first, he likes it better. And now to the rest of the books that I read. In the first part, I had shared that most of the books I read were pretty good, and I even had a 5-star with The Mysterious Magic of Lighthouse Lane. I had 2 more 5 stars in March, and the first one was the next middle grade I read. This is The 9 Moons of Han Yu and Luli by Karina Young Glaser. If you've read the Vanderbeekers book, this is the same author, which is why I chose to read this. It was not on my radar at first, but I was in a bookstore in the middle of March and saw it that had just come out. And we love the Vanderbeekers, so I decided to give this a try. This tells the story of 2 different time periods. A little girl that is Chinese living in New York City. Well, her family owns a building that has a restaurant. They have a little shop, and the girl and her friend want to make a museum in it. And this is right at the beginning of the 1930s. And then the other part of the story is Han Yu, who is a young man in ancient China, and he is having to travel along the Silk Road. When I first started reading it, I wasn't sure what I was going to think of it. It took me a minute to get really fully invested in it, but once I did, I loved it. It was so good. I loved both storylines equally, and I loved the way they tied together at the end. In fact, the last half of this book, I had a really hard time putting it down. So I highly recommend this. So far, this is the only other thing I've read from her besides Vanderbeekers, so it definitely makes me want to read more from her. I did finally finish Operation Paperclip by Annie Jacobsen. This is the story about the secret intelligence program where the US government brought over Nazi scientists to the United States after World War II. And it was such a crazy read. It made me really mad sometimes too, to read about the atrocities that some of these men committed and then how they were brought to the United States, and they had so many luxuries and they ended up having power and prestige, and so many of our programs started with them. Some of the good programs and some of the really bad ones. And if you've ever read the book Chaos, this would be a good book to read before that, because some of the things that happen in that, with things that they did to people with drugs, came directly from the scientists, and you learn about that in the book. Also, it talked about the people that ended up working for NASA. And it was such an interesting read. This is very, very information dense, why it took me so long to get through it. There were days when I was just like, when I just thought, I want to be done with this. I'm tired of reading about these guys. But it was so interesting. And so if you are interested in it, it's definitely a good read. If not, if you don't want to read the whole book, I would recommend maybe looking up on YouTube or something and seeing if you can find something about it, because it is such an interesting part of our history that I never learned until I heard about this book and then with reading it. And then I finished my other 5-star of March, and this technically was a book I started earlier in the year and just finished in March, but I always count the book in the month that I finish it. This definitely was a 5-star. This is The Brothers Karamazov. This is by Fyodor Dostoevsky. This tells the story of a father and his 3 sons, and how they have 2 different mothers. They are sent away. They come back at this point, when the book starts, they've all come back to the town. There is a murder and a trial. It was a very big book. There were parts of it that didn't engage me at a 5-star level, but there were other parts that were some of the most impactful things I've ever read. So when it was done, this was a life-changing book for me. And so I had to give the whole thing 5 stars, even though there were some parts that I didn't enjoy as much as others. At the beginning, I was very confused by who was who. So I made a chart that I put at the beginning with the name of each character and all of their nicknames, because you were immediately thrown into characters that would be referred to by many different names. And because the Russian nicknames work a little bit differently, I wasn't sure who was who, and I thought it was new characters. And so I read this along with the Hallow Apps Lent program, and I'm going to talk more about that in another video. And then I also watched some lectures by Benjamin McAvoy. He has a book club that you pay to be a part of, and he does lectures on different books. Doug gifted me a month of that membership so that I could listen to the lectures for this book, and that really helped as well. But yeah, I love this book. I so highly recommend it. So far, I'll just spoil it right now that this was my favorite book of the books I read in March and my favorite book of the year so far. I would say that it was more of an experience. Unfortunately, my next book was a DNF. This was The Millicent Quibb School of Etiquette for Young Ladies of Mad Science. This is by Kate McKinnon. This wasn't a terrible book. I started it and I just wasn't feeling it. It does feel like it's kind of a mixture between a Roald Dahl type of humor and Lemony Snicket's, but I didn't enjoy it as much as either of those things. So I felt like it was almost trying too hard to have that kind of humor, but that could just be my perception and me not being in the mood for it. I'm not sure. Basically, I say DNF. I did skim the rest of it and got to the end and read the end because I wanted to see if it picked up at all, and it just didn't for me. So when I got to the end and read that, I did not like the ending, so I was glad that I hadn't taken more time with it. Sometimes I felt like it was clever, sometimes I just felt like it was exhausting. I mentioned in the last video that I had read the third book in the Restorationist series, and I was reading the first one again with my daughter for school. As it talks about I put it up on the screen and so she can see it while we're reading about it. So this was a reread for me, first time reading it with my daughters. Even my daughter that has graduated was listening in, and then she asked me to read it at times when she could listen. And so my 20-year-old really enjoyed it as well. I think this book series is so creative and really well done. So I highly recommend The Restorationist series by Carolyn Leigh-Glau. I always say I never know how to say her name. If you like middle grade and you like art, I think you would really like those books. They are Christian too. If that's something you're looking for, then it has all three of those things. The next book I read was another book that I picked this up at the same time as the Hanyu and Luli book. And so this was a impulse buy. The Lost Library, and it's by Rebecca Stead and Wendy Mass. And I didn't really know anything about it, but it said that when a mysterious little free library guarded by a large orange cat appears overnight in the small town of Martinville, 11-year-old Evan plucks 2 weathered books from its shelf, never suspecting that his life is about to change. It goes on from there, but that intrigued me, and I loved this book so much more than I thought I was going to. I thought it might just be a fun, cute middle grade read, but ended up being like a 4.5-star read for me. I really enjoyed the characters. If you don't like stories with ghosts in them, even they're not scary ghosts, but there are ghosts in it. The ghosts are people who worked in a library that burned down. So you get the viewpoint of one of them, and then you get a viewpoint of the main boy, Evan, and then you get the viewpoint of the cat. And I really enjoyed that. I thought it was clever, and I thought it was well done. I also really loved the ending. I don't want to say too much about it, but the ending I did see coming, so I feel like it was predictable, but I did like it. So I think this is a really, really good middle grade. And if you love books and little free libraries and libraries in general, I think you would enjoy it. The next book was another kind of disappointment, When You Reach Me by Rebecca Stead. I did not even realize when I picked this up I got this one at the used bookstore during March, and I didn't realize when I picked up this and The Lost Library that they had the same author. And the other one is written by Rebecca Stead and someone else, but this one is just Rebecca Stead. It sounded good. A girl that's getting mysterious notes that are maybe telling the future. It sounded really interesting, and the writing was decent on this. It was good writing, but I didn't really enjoy the way the story went. I would say that what it feels like is this feels like a contemporary book, but then it kind of turns into like a science fiction book almost. That's what it feels like it's a mixture of the two. And it was okay, but there were so many things that as they happened, I thought, well, I don't really like that. So I did not enjoy the way this wrapped up. And I felt like going along, there were a lot of things happening that really had nothing else to do with the story and didn't really matter. So it fell flat for me. I read The Crucible by Arthur Miller. This was a play, and it was really good. It's about the Salem witch trials. Very well written, enough so that it was just making me angry as I read it. As I was reading it, I just kept thinking, it's so unbelievable. It's so hard to believe that something like this happened. And then I thought about today in our world, and I thought, I wonder if this could still happen. I think it could. It's a good time period to keep in mind, and I think that this play was done really well. It really did get me emotional and wrapped up in it. I was very invested. Then I read The Story Collector. This was another one of the books that I got from the used bookstore. This is by Kristen O'Donnell Tubb, and this is a family that lives in the New York Public Library, and there is a theft that happens, and the kids are trying to figure out what happened. this had some other themes too about friendship and different things like that. And I thought it was really good. There was a part where the kids were playing baseball in the library and they're using books as bases. And then, of course, hitting a real ball in a room with windows and books and things. And that stressed me out. It kind of reminded me of, if you've seen Wicked, if you've seen the movie, when they're in the library scene and they're like sliding along the floor and counters on top of books. Kind of reminded me of that, where it just stresses you out a little bit if you love books. So that part I didn't love so much. But I thought that the characters were interesting. At the end, the author's note let you know that these characters were real, that they were based on real people. So the story is fictional, but there was a family that lived in this library that were the dad was the supervisor or caretaker or whatever it was called. So I thought that was really interesting. I would say this one ended up being like a 3.5 to 4 star, not the best thing I've ever read, but it was decent and I enjoyed the reading process. And then the last thing I read in March, I finished on the very last day, and that was an audiobook. In December, I got a deal for Audible that was really, really cheap. I believe it was 99 cents a month, and it was for 3 months. And then when those ended in March, I went to cancel it, and they gave it to me for, I think it was $3.99 a month for the next 3 months. And so I'm using those months of really cheap to get all of the Harry Potter full cast audiobooks. So I listened to the first one, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. And it was interesting. I'm really enjoying them. I like having all of the different voices. I like the sound effects. I do feel like sometimes they are a little bit overwhelming, where there's so much background noise that it's hard to hear the narrator. So that would be my only criticism, is that maybe there is too much background noise. But every once in a while, it's really fun and adds to the experience. And I think that the voice actors are really great. So that was really fun. That I was not even planning on doing in March. I've been collecting them each month, but I wasn't going to listen to them. But then I decided that since I'm going to be doing a reread of books 6 and 7 this summer, that it might be fun to listen to the full cast audios leading up to that. So that was why I decided to do it in the last few days, and I really enjoyed it. I do think it's a really fun idea, and it kind of feels like getting the movie or the TV series that's coming up, where they're making so many changes and the movies have so many changes. It almost feels like you're getting that movie or TV experience. But it is exactly the book, which is what a lot of us book lovers want. I would love to know what your favorite books of March were. Did you read a lot of middle grade? I ended up reading 26 books in March, which was crazy. I didn't think I was really going to get to that many. And if you counted my DNFs, I think it was 29 or 30. So I almost made it to the book a day challenge, but not quite. But I really enjoyed it. Most of them were really good. And like I said, my very favorite books of the month were The Brothers Karamazov, The 9 Moons of Han Yu and Luli, and The Mysterious Magic of Lighthouse Lane.